On August 15th, 2022, a group of 5 individuals ventured into the remote northeastern section of Black Hills National Forest in South Dakota. Only one survived. Ranger station records indicate that James Whitehorse, 38, had filed a hiking plan for a 3-day camping trip with 4 companions. 6 days later, Highway Patrol found Whitehorse 17 miles from his designated campsite, walking along State Highway 85 in a severe state of dehydration and exposure. He had lost 28 pounds, suffered multiple lacerations to his back and legs consistent with tree bark abrasions, and exhibited signs of severe psychological trauma. The bodies of his companions Michael Brenner, 42, Sophia Chen, 35, David Martinez, 31, and Thomas Whitehorse, 41, were never recovered despite a comprehensive 2-week search operation involving park rangers, local law enforcement, and volunteer search parties. Officials ultimately attributed the disappearances to a combination of flash flooding in the area's narrow ravines and possible wildlife predation, though no conclusive evidence supported either theory. James Whitehorse resigned from his position as a cultural liaison for the Lakota Nation 3 weeks after the incident and relocated to Minneapolis, Minnesota, where he has refused all interview requests from journalists and documentary film makers. What follows is his account. My name is James Whitehorse. I'm 38 years old, Oglala Lakota, born and raised on Pine Ridge Reservation, about 80 miles southeast of the Black Hills. My father was full-blood Lakota, my mother half Lakota and half Irish. I worked as a cultural liaison between tribal authorities and state park services for 11 years before the incident. I specialized in indigenous land use, archaeological preservation, and traditional ecological knowledge. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology from South Dakota State and a master's in Indigenous studies from the University of Minnesota. I know the Black Hills. I grew up with the stories. I should have listened better. Tom was my older brother. He had been a Marine for 16 years, did 3 tours in Afghanistan and 1 in Iraq. Staff sergeant, combat engineer, 6'2" solid muscle even at 41. He'd been home for 3 years working as a security consultant for a firm in Rapid City. Tom never talked much about his time overseas, but I knew he had seen things, done things. He was different when he came back. More quiet, more watchful. But still Tom. Still the brother who taught me to hunt, to track, to move through the forest like our grandfather had taught him. Tom could build a shelter from nothing, start a fire in a rainstorm, track a deer for miles by almost invisible signs. He was the last person I'd ever worry about in the woods. Mike Brenner was Tom's buddy from the Marines. They'd served in the same unit in Afghanistan. Mike was the medic, the guy everyone counted on, 6 feet even, maybe 190. Buzz cut. Always had a joke, but serious when it mattered. He had medical training, not just field medicine, but actual emergency medicine. He'd been working as a paramedic in Denver since getting out. Tom trusted him completely. Said Mike had pulled 3 men out of a burning Humvee after an IED hit. Said Mike once performed an emergency tracheotomy with a pen casing and a pocket knife. Mike carried a modified first aid kit everywhere, even on casual hikes. The kind with quick clot, Israeli bandages, chest seals. The serious stuff. He also carried a Glock 19. Said old habits die hard. Sophia Chen was a geologist working for the U.S. Geological Survey. She was mapping subsurface formations in the Black Hills for a water table study. We'd worked together on a few projects where her research overlapped with culturally significant sites. 5'4", lean and strong from fieldwork. She could carry a 50-pound pack all day without complaint. Sophia had this way of seeing landscapes, not just the surface, but what was underneath, the bones of the earth. She could read rock formations like stories. Tell you how old they were, how they formed, what had happened to them over millions of years. She spoke 3 languages fluently and was learning Lakota. She was engaged to be married in December. David Martinez was our guide. Not that we needed one really, with Tom and me, but he knew parts of the Northern Hills better than anyone. David worked for the Forest Service as a backcountry ranger for 6 years, then started his own guide service specializing in off-trail expeditions. Mexican-American, grew up in Spearfish. 5'10", wiry, strong, with a full beard and calloused hands. David could identify every plant, every animal sign in the hills. He carried a topographical map that he'd annotated with hundreds of personal notes. Water sources, cave entrances, old mining sites, places where cell signals sometimes worked. He also carried a Ruger .357 revolver in a chest holster. Standard practice in bear country, he said. He'd never had to use it. I wouldn't have gone into those woods if it weren't for Tom. 3 months before the trip, his 8-year-old daughter, my niece Amanda, disappeared during a camping trip with her mother's family near Deerfield Lake. They were at a developed campground, nothing remote. Amanda went to use the pit toilet 50 yards from their site at dusk. She never came back. The search lasted 2 weeks. Dogs, helicopters, volunteers, professionals, nothing. Not a footprint, not a piece of clothing, nothing. The official report called it a probable abduction, but there were no leads, no suspects, no evidence at all. Tom didn't believe it was an abduction. He wouldn't say what he thought happened, not directly, but he started researching disappearances in the Black Hills. He found patterns, clusters, areas where people went missing more often. Most were officially explained: exposure, accidents, wildlife attacks, but the evidence was often thin, bodies rarely recovered. Tom kept talking about unnatural silences in the reports, about missing time, about search parties finding footprints that just stopped in the middle of nowhere. I thought grief was making him see patterns that weren't there. I was wrong. 2 weeks before we left, Tom visited our grandfather. Grandpa Joe was 93, living in a nursing home in Pine Ridge. His mind drifted sometimes, but when he was present, he was sharp as ever. Tom came back from that visit different, focused. He'd filled a notebook with Lakota words, with drawings. He showed me 1 page. It was a crude sketch of something tall and thin with too many joints. The Lakota word written beneath it was Winatung. I knew the word. It meant takers, not people who take things, things that take people. Grandpa had stories about them that he never told when we were kids. Only adults heard those stories, and only certain adults. I asked Tom what Grandpa had told him. He just shook his head and said, "We need to go to the Northern Hills. I know where to look now." I agreed to help because Tom was my brother, because Amanda was my niece, because I thought we'd find nothing, and Tom could finally start to heal. Sophia came because she'd been wanting to survey that area anyway. Mike came because Tom asked, and that was enough. David came because I hired him, but also because he'd lost a cousin in those same woods 10 years earlier. Missing hikers weren't just statistics to him. We assembled our gear methodically. Tom and Mike handled most of it. They approached it like a mission. 2 4-season mountain hardware tents, 5 ALPS mountaineering 0-degree sleeping bags, 5 Osprey expedition packs, a jet boil cooking system, water purification tablets, freeze-dried meals for 7 days, though we planned to be out only 5, first aid kits, the serious kind Mike insisted on, emergency blankets, signal mirrors, waterproof matches, compass, GPS units with extra batteries, personal locator beacons, satellite phone, rain gear, extra socks, extra everything. For tools, fixed blade survival knives, multi-tools, a hatchet, 50 feet of paracord each, headlamps, spare batteries. Tom and Mike each carried sidearms. Tom a Beretta M9, Mike his Glock. David had his Ruger. I brought my grandfather's old pipe and a small pouch of tobacco for prayers. Sophia packed core sampling tools and a specialized hammer for rock testing. Everything was checked twice, distributed by weight and necessity. Our packs averaged 55 pounds each. We drove out on August 12th in David's Ford F-250 crew cab, left Rapid City at 4:30 a.m., reached the trailhead by 7:15. The temperature was 62 degrees, clear skies, light wind from the southwest. Perfect hiking weather. We parked at an unmarked Forest Service road about 12 miles northwest of Savoy. David had a special permit for the gate key. The area wasn't exactly closed to the public, just undeveloped. No maintained trails, no campsites. We shouldered our packs and headed northeast into the forest at 7:45 a.m. The first day was uneventful. We followed game trails where possible, used David's GPS otherwise. The forest was thick, ponderosa pine mostly, with stands of aspen and birch in the lower areas. The ground was carpeted with pine needles, making for quiet walking. We crossed 2 small streams, saw deer tracks, elk tracks, some coyote sign. Normal forest sounds surrounded us. Wind in the pines, chickadees, nuthatches, the occasional raven. We made good time, covering about 8 miles before setting up camp in a small clearing near a spring-fed creek. Nothing felt wrong. Nothing felt strange. Just a beautiful day in the Black Hills. That night, sitting around the small cook fire, Tom finally told us why we were really there. He unfolded a Forest Service map marked with red X's, 16 of them, spread across the northern hills. Each X represented a disappearance going back 30 years. 6 were children, 10 were adults. None of the bodies had been recovered. The X's formed a rough circle about 20 miles in diameter. At the center of that circle was a deep ravine that didn't appear on official maps. That's where Tom believed we would find something. Not Amanda, necessarily. He wasn't that naive, but answers, some kind of answers. Mike and David exchanged looks but said nothing. Sophia asked the obvious question. What do you think took these people, Tom? Tom was silent for a long time. Then he said, Grandpa Joe calls them Vinatung. The old stories say they're tall, thin, hungry all the time but never satisfied. They take people, not to eat, though they do that too, but to make more of themselves. They steal more than bodies. They steal. He struggled for the word. Essence, being, soul. The translation isn't perfect. I knew Tom was describing what white people call Wendigo, but that word has been twisted, commercialized. The Lakota Vinatung is older, more specific. They aren't created by cannibalism. They exist independently. They are intelligent. They are patient. They have always been here. No one laughed at Tom. No one dismissed him. We'd all been in these woods too long to discount the stories completely, but I could see the skepticism, especially in Sophia's face. She was too polite to say it, but I knew what she was thinking. Grief makes people believe strange things. I thought the same. I thought this expedition was just a way for Tom to process his loss. I was wrong. We woke at dawn the next morning. The temperature had dropped overnight, unusual for August. 43 degrees according to David's thermometer. Our breath fogged in the morning air. We ate a quick breakfast of instant oatmeal and coffee from the jet boil, then packed up and continued northeast. The terrain grew steeper, more difficult. We were heading into older parts of the forest, where the trees grew more densely and deadfall blocked our path regularly. By noon we had covered only about 4 miles. The sky remained clear, but something had changed in the forest. I noticed it first around 11:30. The birds had gone quiet. In the woods, sudden silence usually means a predator is nearby. Hawk, fox, coyote, something that makes the small creatures hide and be still. But this silence was different, absolute. No wind in the trees, no insects buzzing, no squirrels chattering, nothing. Just the sound of our boots on pine needles and our own breathing. I mentioned it to David. He nodded, frowning. Been like that for about half an hour, no wind either. Tom had noticed, too. He and Mike had moved closer together, walking with their hands near their sidearms. Sophia was recording something in her small field notebook, her eyes darting up to scan the forest every few seconds. We stopped for lunch in a small clearing. No one said much. We ate energy bars and beef jerky, drank water filtered from the last stream we'd crossed. The silence pressed in around us like a physical thing. I found myself straining to hear anything. A bird, an insect, the rustle of leaves? Nothing. David checked his watch, then the GPS. We're about 3 miles from the ravine on Tom's map. We can make it by 4 if we push. We left the clearing at 1:15 p.m. The forest seemed to grow darker as we walked, though the sky remained clear. The trees stood closer together, their branches intertwining overhead to block much of the sunlight. The ground changed too. Fewer pine needles, more bare earth and rock, and the silence. The unrelenting silence. We had to be more careful now, watching our footing on the increasingly rocky terrain. Twice Sophia stopped to examine unusual rock formations, layers that seemed to bend in impossible ways, she said. Evidence of extreme geological pressure. Not unusual in mountains, but strange to find in this particular area. At 3:27 p.m., David stopped abruptly, holding up his hand in the military signal for halt. We froze. He pointed to the ground in front of him. A single footprint in a patch of soft earth. Not human, not animal, at least not any animal native to the Black Hills. It was elongated, nearly 18 inches from heel to toe. Narrow, with what looked like 4 toes ending in sharp points. The impression was deep, suggesting significant weight. Whatever made it had passed through recently. The edges were still sharp, undisturbed by wind or rain. Mike crouched beside it, his hand on his Glock. "Mountain lion," he suggested, but his tone said he didn't believe it. David shook his head. "Wrong shape, too big." Tom said nothing, but I saw his jaw tighten. He unzipped a side pocket on his pack and removed Grandpa's notebook. He flipped to a page and showed it to David. A drawing of a footprint that matched what we were seeing almost exactly. David's face went pale. "We should turn back," he said quietly. Tom shook his head. "We're close. We need to see." I agreed with David, but I wouldn't leave Tom. Not out here, not with that print in the dirt in front of us. We continued forward more slowly now, more carefully. The silence seemed to deepen, if that was possible. I felt it in my chest, a pressure that made it hard to breathe. We spread out slightly, moving from tree to tree, stopping often to listen, to look. We were no longer hikers. We were prey. The ravine appeared suddenly. One moment we were moving through dense forest, the next we stood at the edge of a sharp drop-off. It was about 60 feet deep, maybe 40 feet across at its widest point. The walls were nearly vertical, eroded sandstone and shale. At the bottom, a small stream trickled through a bed of smooth stones. But what caught our attention, what made us all stop breathing for a moment, were the trees. Pines and aspens had been driven into the ground around the perimeter of the ravine, not grown, driven like stakes. They had been stripped of branches, their trunks sharpened at both ends. One end was buried in the earth, the other pointed skyward. There were dozens of them, spaced about 3 feet apart, forming a circle around the entire ravine. This was not natural. This was not the work of rangers or forestry officials. This was not the work of humans at all. "Jesus Christ," Mike whispered. Sophia was already documenting, taking photos with her small digital camera. David had his GPS out, marking our location. Tom just stared, his face unreadable. I felt sick. The construction reminded me of something, but I couldn't place it. Then Tom said it. It's a nest. We made camp about a quarter-mile from the ravine. No one suggested going closer, at least not before daylight. No one suggested leaving either, though I think we all wanted to. We set up the tents in a tight cluster, gathered more firewood than we needed, and built a larger fire than was strictly necessary. As darkness fell, the silence finally broke. But what replaced it was worse. It started as a vibration. Not a sound exactly, more a feeling in the bones and teeth. A humming that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. It grew slowly, building until it became audible. A low, continuous tone that rose and fell slightly like breathing. None of us spoke. We stared into the fire, our hands close to our weapons. The humming continued for 23 minutes. I know because I timed it on my watch. Then it stopped as suddenly as it had begun, and the silence returned. David was the first to speak. That wasn't any animal. No one disagreed. We decided to set watches, 2 people awake at all times through the night. Tom and I took first watch, then Mike and Sophia, then David alone for the pre-dawn hours. Nothing happened during our watch. Tom and I sat by the fire, speaking little. Once he said, "They know we're here." I didn't ask who they were. I didn't want him to answer. I woke to screaming, not human screaming, something higher, sharper, like metal tearing. I bolted upright in my sleeping bag. The time was 3:17 a.m., according to my watch. David should have been on watch. I fumbled for my headlamp, clicked it on. The tent was empty except for me. Tom's sleeping bag was thrown back, empty. I heard voices outside, urgent, frightened. I grabbed my knife and scrambled out of the tent. The fire had burned down to coals. David and Mike stood back to back, their weapons drawn. Sophia was frantically trying to restart the fire, adding small sticks to the embers. Tom was nowhere to be seen. "What happened?" I demanded. "Where's Tom?" Mike turned to me, his face pale in the dim light. "Something took him, right out of your tent. David heard it, woke us up. We found drag marks." He pointed his flashlight beam at the ground. 2 parallel grooves led from our tent into the forest, as if Tom had been pulled away by his feet. Along the edges of the grooves were those same footprints we'd seen earlier, the long, 4-toed prints. David was already stuffing supplies into his pack. "We need to follow now, while the trail is fresh." His voice was steady, professional. But I could hear the fear underneath. We gathered only what was essential: water, first aid, weapons, lights. We left the tents and sleeping bags. They didn't matter anymore. All that mattered was finding Tom. We followed the drag marks by flashlight. They were clear at first, then less so as the ground became rockier. The footprints continued though, spaced about 4 feet apart, moving quickly. We had to be careful not to lose the trail while also watching the forest around us. The silence was back, pressing against our ears, broken only by our breathing and the soft crunch of our boots. We moved as quickly as we dared in the darkness, David in the lead, then Mike, then Sophia, with me bringing up the rear. No one spoke. The trail led directly to the ravine. When we reached the perimeter of sharpened trees, the drag marks and footprints disappeared. It was as if whatever had taken Tom had simply vanished, or gone over the edge. David played his flashlight beam down into the ravine. The small stream glinted back, but there was no sign of movement, no sign of Tom. "We need to get down there," I said. My voice sounded strange in the silence, too loud. Mike was already unpacking a length of climbing rope from his pack. He'd been a climber before the Marines, still kept up with it as a hobby. He selected a sturdy pine about 10 feet back from the edge, looped the rope around it, and set up a rappel line. David would go first, then Sophia, then me, with Mike coming last. David had just started over the edge when we heard it. The humming. Louder this time, more insistent, it seemed to vibrate through the ground, up through our bodies. With it came a smell. Musty, organic, like rotting leaves and stagnant water, but with a metallic undertone that made my stomach turn. Mike froze, one hand on the rope, the other on his Glock. "Move," he hissed. "Now, everyone down." David disappeared over the edge. Sophia followed quickly. I was next, taking the rope with shaking hands, backing toward the ravine edge. I'd rappelled before. Tom had taught me years ago, but never at night, never with that humming growing louder in my bones. I stepped over the edge, leaning back against the rope, and began to descend. I was about halfway down when I heard the gunshots. 3 sharp cracks from Mike's Glock, followed by a sound I can't adequately describe. A screech that was partly organic, partly something else, like stone grinding on metal. I looked up but couldn't see the rim from my position. "Mike," I called. No answer. I descended faster, my boots slipping on the ravine wall. Above me the humming grew louder, changed pitch, became a pulsing rhythm that made my teeth ache. I reached the bottom and immediately freed myself from the rope. David had his flashlight trained upward, trying to see what was happening. Sophia stood beside him, her face ghostly in the reflected light. "Did you see what it was?" I asked. David shook his head. "Just movement. Something big." Then Mike's voice called down from above. "I'm coming down. Be ready to move." He sounded breathless, frightened. The rope jerked as Mike's weight hit it. He came down fast, too fast, and landed hard at the bottom, stumbling forward. David caught him before he fell. Mike's face was scratched, bleeding from a dozen small cuts. His jacket was torn at the shoulder. "We need to move," he gasped. "They're up there. 3 of them. Maybe more." "What did you see?" Sophia asked, already pulling antiseptic wipes from her first aid kit. Mike shook his head, wincing as she dabbed at his face. "Tall. Too tall. 8 feet at least. Thin, like impossibly thin. Arms too long, legs too long. Everything wrong." He swallowed hard. They were standing just beyond the firelight, watching. Then they moved closer. I fired, hit one. It didn't bleed. The wound just closed, not healed, closed, like the flesh had never been broken. The stream ran down the center of the ravine, creating a natural path. We followed it, moving as quietly as possible, our flashlight beams sweeping the ground ahead and the ravine walls to either side. The stone was strange here. Layers that curved and bent in ways that Sophia said were geologically impossible. The walls were dotted with small openings, not quite caves, more like burrows or dens. We checked each one as we passed. Empty. We had traveled about a quarter-mile down the ravine when David stopped abruptly. His flashlight beam had caught something ahead, a splash of color against the gray stone. We moved closer. Tom's jacket, his distinctive red North Face shell, lay crumpled on a rock beside the stream. There was no blood, no sign of struggle, just the jacket, placed almost deliberately, like a marker or a lure. "This feels like a trap," Mike said quietly. None of us disagreed, but we couldn't turn back, not without Tom. We continued forward, more cautiously now, bunched closer together. The ravine narrowed, the walls drawing inward until they were barely 10 feet apart. The stream disappeared underground. The humming returned, vibrating through the stone around us. And then we found the chamber. The ravine suddenly opened into a circular space about 50 feet in diameter. The walls rose straight up for about 30 feet, then curved inward to form a dome-like ceiling with a small opening at the center that admitted a shaft of moonlight. The ground was flat, smooth stone, worn by water over thousands of years, and covering that stone floor were bones, not scattered randomly but arranged in precise geometric patterns, circles within circles, long bones forming spokes radiating from central points, skulls, human skulls, dozens of them, placed at regular intervals around the perimeter. Some of the bones were obviously old, yellowed with age. Others looked disturbingly fresh, still holding traces of tissue. And at the center of the chamber, illuminated by that single shaft of moonlight, was a structure. It rose about 12 feet high, constructed entirely of bones. Human bones. A sort of throne or altar, intricately woven together without nails or binding. Femurs formed the main supports. Ribs created delicate arches. Vertebrae served as decorative elements along the edges. And seated upon this throne of bones was Tom. He wasn't moving. His eyes were open but vacant, staring at nothing. His skin had a grey cast to it, as if all the blood had been drained away. He was breathing. I could see the slight rise and fall of his chest, but he showed no awareness of our presence. No recognition when I called his name. No reaction when Mike shone his flashlight directly into his eyes. He just sat there, empty. Sophia was documenting everything, her camera clicking rapidly. David stood with his back to us, watching the entrance we'd come through, his Ruger held ready. Mike moved cautiously toward Tom, his medical training taking over. "Cover me," he told me, and I drew my knife, for whatever good it might do. Mike reached the bone throne and began checking Tom's vital signs. Pulse, pupils, skin temperature. "He's alive," Mike reported, "but his pulse is way too slow. Body temperature too low. It's like he's in some kind of hibernation state." The humming changed pitch again, rising to a frequency that made my ears hurt. The moonlight dimmed as shadows passed across the opening above. Something was up there, looking down at us. Many somethings. David fired a shot upward, a warning, not aimed at anything specific. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space, but the humming didn't stop. If anything, it intensified. "We need to get him out of here," Mike said, already trying to lift Tom from the throne. Tom was dead weight, unresponsive. It would take at least 2 of us to carry him. I moved to help, and together Mike and I managed to get Tom off the throne and onto the ground. His body was cold, not corpse cold, but much colder than it should have been. His eyes remained open, unseeing. That's when the Vinatong entered the chamber. Not from the passage we'd used, but from openings high in the walls that we hadn't noticed before. They didn't climb down. They moved like spiders, their 2 long limbs finding impossible perches on the smooth stone. 3 of them, just as Mike had described, impossibly tall and thin, wrong in every proportion. Their skin was a pale grey-white, stretched too tight over elongated bones. Their faces were almost human, but not quite. The eyes too large, too dark, too knowing. The mouths too wide, filled with too many teeth. David fired first, 3 shots in rapid succession that hit the nearest creature squarely in the chest. It paused briefly, looked down at the wounds as they closed over, then continued its advance. Sophia was frozen in place, her camera forgotten. Mike drew his Glock but hesitated. He had seen already that bullets were useless. I stood over Tom's prone body, knife out, knowing it would do nothing but unable to think of any other action. The creatures moved with terrible grace, flowing down the walls to the chamber floor. The humming emanated directly from them now. Not from their mouths, but from their entire bodies, as if they were instruments being played by some unseen force. They surrounded us, keeping just beyond the reach of our lights, their forms seeming to waver and shift in the shadows. One of them spoke, not in words exactly, but in sounds that arranged themselves into meaning in my mind. Thanka Shila Kikua. Grandfather searches. The language was ancient Lakota, a dialect I'd only heard in the oldest recordings preserved by tribal elders. I understood, though I shouldn't have. The creature was talking about my grandfather, about Tom's and my grandfather. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The creature tilted its head at an impossible angle, regarding me with those two large eyes. Tankashila Thawich Hashake, grandfather's power. And then I understood. Tom had gone to our grandfather. Grandpa Joe had told him things, shown him things, knowledge that the Winatang wanted. Knowledge about them, about how to find them, about how to fight them. The creature nearest to me extended one of its two long arms, the fingers elongating further, reaching for Tom. Without thinking, I swung my knife at those reaching fingers. The blade connected, slicing through with surprising ease. The creature made no sound, but the severed fingers fell to the stone floor. They did not bleed. They did not writhe. They simply dissolved, turning to a fine white powder that was quickly absorbed into the stone. The creature withdrew its damaged hand, the wound closing immediately, new fingers already forming. Mike saw his chance. While the creatures were focused on me and Tom, he grabbed Sophia's arm and pushed her toward the passage we'd entered through. "Run!" he shouted. "Get help!" Sophia hesitated only a moment, then sprinted for the opening. One of the creatures moved to intercept her, but David fired repeatedly, drawing its attention. Sophia disappeared into the passage. What happened next is difficult to describe with precision. The creatures moved suddenly, all at once, flowing across the chamber like liquid. David was the first to go. The nearest creature simply engulfed him. There's no other word for it. One moment David was firing his Ruger, the next he was gone, absorbed into the creature's form. There was no blood. No struggle. No sound. David was gone. Mike fired until his Glock clicked empty, then drew a combat knife from his belt. He managed to slash one creature across what would be its abdomen on a human. The wound opened, revealing not organs but a swirling darkness that seemed to pull at the light itself. Then the wound closed, and the creature reached for Mike. I tried to call out a warning, but my voice wouldn't work. Mike was gone. Just gone. I was alone with Tom, surrounded by the three creatures. The humming had reached a pitch that made blood trickle from my ears. I couldn't think, couldn't plan, could only react. I dropped my knife, reached into my pocket, and pulled out my grandfather's pipe and tobacco pouch. The creatures paused, watching. I packed the pipe with shaking hands, using the tobacco Grandpa had given me years ago for ceremonial purposes. Tobacco I'd never used. Tobacco meant for speaking with spirits. I had no lighter, no matches. They were in my pack, left behind when we'd followed Tom's trail, but as I held the pipe, it began to smolder on its own. The tobacco glowed red, and smoke rose in a thin column that didn't dissipate but held its form. I didn't question it. I simply began to speak the words my grandfather had taught me long ago. Words I'd never had reason to use until now. Prayer words, power words, words in a dialect of Lakota so old that even the tribal elders rarely used it. The creatures withdrew slightly, their humming changing tone, becoming discordant. The smoke from the pipe grew thicker, forming a barrier between us and them. I continued speaking the words, my voice growing stronger. Tom stirred at my feet, his eyes blinking, awareness returning to his face. "James?" he whispered. "What's happening?" "We need to go," I told him, not breaking the rhythm of the words. "Can you walk?" Tom nodded weakly. I helped him to his feet, keeping the pipe in one hand, supporting him with the other. The smoke continued to form a wall between us and the creatures, who paced beyond it, their movements becoming more agitated. We began to move toward the passage, step by careful step. The creatures followed but did not break through the smoke barrier. We reached the passage, Tom leaning heavily on me. The pipe was almost spent, the tobacco burning down to ash. I knew when it went out, the protection would end. We moved faster, stumbling through the narrow ravine in near darkness. I had dropped my flashlight in the chamber. Behind us, the humming grew louder, angrier. The creatures were following. Tom was regaining strength with each step, his movements becoming more coordinated. "David?" he asked. "Mike? Sophia?" I couldn't answer. Couldn't tell him they were gone. We kept moving, following the stream that had reappeared, knowing it would lead us out of the ravine. Behind us, the humming grew more distant. The pipe finally went out, the last of the tobacco consumed. I dropped it without stopping. We reached the point where we had descended into the ravine. The climbing rope still hung down the wall, but there was no way Tom could climb in his condition. We would have to find another way out. We continued downstream, hoping the ravine would eventually slope upward to ground level. The sky was beginning to lighten above us. Dawn was approaching. We had been in that chamber longer than I'd realized. The ravine did eventually slope upward, the walls growing lower, the stream bed rising. As the first true light of dawn broke over the trees, we climbed out onto level ground, exhausted and disoriented. We were far from our campsite, in a part of the forest neither of us recognized. Tom was more alert now, but still weak, still cold to the touch. "What were those things?" he asked, though I think he already knew the answer. "Winatong," I said, "what Grandpa warned you about." Tom nodded slowly. "They took Amanda," he said. It wasn't a question. I saw her there in the Bone Palace. Not her body, just pieces. His voice broke. They take parts of people, not just physical parts. Something else, something inside. We walked for hours, following the sun east, knowing we would eventually hit a road or trail. Tom told me what had happened, how he'd been pulled from the tent by something impossibly strong, how he'd tried to fight but couldn't move, couldn't even scream. How he'd been taken to that bone chamber and placed on the throne. How the creatures had surrounded him, humming, pulling something out of him that he couldn't name. He remembered everything, right up until we found him. Sophia found us first, or rather, the search party she had led back found us. She had made it out of the ravine and run until she reached a highway, where a passing truck driver had picked her up and taken her to the nearest ranger station. She'd told them a story about getting separated from her hiking group, about her friends being lost in the woods. She hadn't mentioned the creatures. Who would believe her? The official report says that David and Mike were lost in a flash flood that swept through the ravine. Their bodies were never recovered. The bone chamber was never found. When rangers went to the location Sophia provided, they found only an ordinary ravine with a small stream. No bone thrown, no geometric patterns, no sharpened trees forming a perimeter. They concluded that shock and dehydration had caused hallucinations. I know better. Tom knows better. Sophia knows better, though she never spoke to us again after the rescue. She moved to California 3 weeks later, left the Geological Survey, took a teaching position at a community college. I check on her occasionally through mutual colleagues. She doesn't go into the field anymore. Doesn't hike, doesn't camp, doesn't even like to be outside after dark. Tom and I visited Grandpa Joe once more before I left South Dakota. Tom stayed behind. He said he needed to be near where Amanda was taken, that he wasn't finished yet. I couldn't stay, not knowing what was in those woods. Grandpa wasn't surprised when we told him what happened. He just nodded, his ancient face creasing with sadness. "Winatung koapi wichasha thawaching," he said. The takers hunt for the essence of people. Before I left, Grandpa gave me a small leather pouch to wear around my neck. He wouldn't tell me what was inside, just that it would hide me from their senses. I wear it always. I live in Minneapolis now. I work indoors. I don't hike anymore. I don't go into the woods, any woods. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that humming, not outside, but inside my head, inside my bones. And I know they're still there, in the Black Hills. Still hunting, still taking. The bone patterns meant something. Sophia figured it out later. sent me a single email before she disappeared from my life completely. The patterns matched the constellations visible above the Black Hills in mid-August, but not the current constellations. The patterns matched the sky as it would have appeared over that exact spot 12,000 years ago. The Winatung have been there a very long time. They'll be there long after we're gone. I still have nightmares about that chamber, about the bone throne, about the way those creatures moved. But what haunts me most is what Tom said about Amanda, about them taking pieces of people, not just physical pieces, something else, something inside. I don't know what that means exactly, but I know it's true. I felt it happening to Tom. Would have felt it happen to me if not for Grandpa's pipe. If you're reading this, stay out of the northern Black Hills. Stay away from unmarked ravines. And if you're ever in the woods, anywhere, and suddenly notice that all sound has stopped, no birds, no insects, no wind in the trees, turn around, walk away. Don't run, don't panic, just leave, calmly and quietly. Because they're listening for you, waiting for you. And once they have your scent, once they have your essence, they never, ever stop hunting. They're still looking for me, for Tom, for Sophia. I can feel them searching, their awareness spreading like ripples through the world. Sometimes I think I see them. A too tall, too thin figure at the edge of a parking lot at night. A silhouette in my peripheral vision that vanishes when I turn to look. The humming in my dreams growing louder. I don't know how many of them there are. I don't know how old they are. I just know they're hungry and they're patient and they remember everyone they've ever encountered. I know they're waiting. And sometimes, on the darkest nights, I find myself listening for that humming, almost wanting to hear it again. Almost wanting to know for certain that they've finally found me, that the waiting is over. That's the worst part. Somewhere deep inside, beneath the fear, there's a hollow space where something used to be, something the Winatung touched, something they're still calling to, something that wants to answer.